Hey everybody, it's Overkill here with the first of this series of extra factions for Total War Warhammer. We've covered the main five, that being Empire, Chaos, Dwarfs, Vampire Counts, and Greenskins, that are confirmed to be in Total War Warhammer. So now we're going to take a look at the other factions of the universe. Of course, we'll be looking at the main factions, the ones that are actually playable in the tabletop. And yeah, so today we're talking about the most likely faction to be first added as either a DLC or a free DLC, and that is Bretonnia, the Kingdom of Bretonnia. Now, first, before we get into this, I'd like to thank all of you so much, everybody that's come to my channel because of the series. You guys are awesome, and all the support that has been shown on these series is very much appreciated. And as the channel grows, I'm just going to be able to show you guys more and more gratitude with things like giveaways and all the kinds of things like that. So thank you all so much for supporting the channel. If you're new and you're watching this video, thank you so much, and I hope you guys stick around and enjoy what you see after. But anyway, let's get into the characteristics of Bretonnia. Now, in terms of manpower, Bretonnia is definitely one of the smaller armies in Warhammer. Now, since this is not a confirmed faction for Total War Warhammer yet as playable, even though it's, you know, not confirmed, even though it kind of is, just by common sense. In tabletop terms, they're one of the smaller armies because they're usually all cavalry, and that's going to reflect as well in Total War, with obviously cavalry units being smaller than infantry units. So if you have a full army of cavalry with a little bit of infantry, obviously you're going to have a lot less than a full infantry army of Greenskins or even Empire. The Knights of Bretonnia, are among the best in the entire game, and of course they have to be. That's what Bretonnia relies on. If they didn't have the best cavalry, they would be a useless faction. And sadly, in the tabletop, cavalry isn't amazing, so Bretonnia is definitely out of the top bracket of factions. But in Total War, cavalry, especially in a fantasy setting, will be very powerful. As we've seen in Attila, cavalry is absolutely amazing. So in Warhammer, no doubt Bretonnia is going to be able to flatten most enemy units with their cavalry. They have very few non-cavalry units. As I said, their army is based around cavalry, so they have a few units of infantry and other various foot units. They are very charge reliant. The tactics of the Bretonnians is usually the same in every single battle, which is hammer and anvil. They'll send in peasants to hold the enemy infantry or any other units, and their cavalry will flank around and strike the rear. It's basically the only plan that they can really use due to the units given to them, and it's effective though because of how powerful they are. Many of the units are well armored, the exception being usually the infantry. If they don't have chainmail, they have leather, gambesons, stuff like that. They're usually very well armored. Some of the strongest armor units in the game, apart from maybe Chaos Warriors and Dwarfs. And they are very strong in the magic department, having 3 spellcasters, that being the Fey Enchantress, the Prophetess of the Lady, and the Damsel of the Lady. So that's a few of the characteristics. We now move on to geography. Bretonnia is one of the greatest of the human realms, almost rivaling even the Empire in size, wealth, and power. As you can see from a map that I'm going to show here, it stretches from the Grey Mountains in the east to the Great Ocean in the west. In the south, it is bordered by Istalia and Tilia, and to the north, its rocky coast is lashed by the stormy Sea of Claws. Bretonnia definitely has one of the fairest climates in the entire Warhammer world, not even just the old world. The land is very fertile, and Bretonnia's landscape can be divided into 6 types, essentially. Arable land, where crops are grown. Pastoral land, where animals are grazed. Forests, mountains, the coast, and the great rivers. The forests and mountains are definitely not very safe places. They contain many dangerous creatures, mainly consisting of orcs and beastmen hordes. And in terms of just geography and the land itself, that's kind of a double meaning, whatever. It's very relatable to feudal England and France, that castles and towns are surrounded by loads of fields and pastures where crops and animals are raised and grown, and where the peasants work, essentially. So we move on to government. This one's moving a little bit fast, but that's because I can't really relate it as good to a Total War game because it's not confirmed. We don't know a lot of the special abilities and stuff of these guys, but either way. They use the feudal system of old, the real feudal system in the world now and in the past, which in Warhammer is an archaic, dated form of government that the rest of the human kingdoms have stopped using. The basic principles of the feudal system is where those below the social ladder must give up their goods and service to those of higher nobility in exchange for protection, in quotations, and certain rights, privileges, and titles. Bretonnia is ruled by a royarch, a fancy name for the king of Bretonnia, which is currently Luanlancor. The royarch's rule is sovereign and absolute, with no laws made within the kingdom having any hold upon the actions of the king. The royarch has the right to do anything he pleases within his realm and has the ability to create new laws or legislation should he wish it. However, to be a king of Bretonnia requires one to become a Grail Knight, and to be a Grail Knight, one must be the purest of all humanity's hearts. So, kings of Bretonnia, although have been corrupt in the past, usually are not. So, the thing about the kings of Bretonnia is they're very, very nice people, usually. King Luan is actually quite for the peasantry, whereas most kings in the past didn't give a shit about them. He cares about their rights. If someone comes to him with the support of a lord, saying how someone is being ill-treated, he will act justly, he will do something, as opposed to other kings and even the other nobles who would just tell them to sod off, essentially. But, yeah. As mentioned earlier, the King of Bretonnia must be a Grail Knight, selected by a conclave of as many other Grail Knights as can attend the Grail Council of Bastogne, immediately following the death of the previous royarch. This unanimous choice is then legitimized by the Fey Enchantress, the holy representative of the Lady of the Lake. Once the election is finalized, the Fey Enchantress will then crown the new royarch for life in a ceremony within the traditional Grail Cathedral of Bastogne. So, you can tell already that a lot of religious things is taking over in the whole feudal system. It's very relevant to the relatable rather to the church in France and England, and the Pope essentially to some other feudal countries back in the medieval ages. So you can see it's very based on England, France, and the like, basically. Under the royarch are 12 dukes. Now, the 12 dukes each own one duchy. These are the dukedom of Longueuil, Aquitaine, Artois, Bastogne, Bordelot, Brionne, Carcassonne, Couronne, Gisors, Lyonnaise, Montfort, Paravon, and Quenelles. Now, please excuse me, my French and whatever other languages might be mixed into this are a little bit bad, so yeah. And there were former dukedoms. Those would be Mousillon, Couleau, and Glanboreal. Now, Mousillon has become a vampire-held dukedom. We know that because the factions on the actual Warhammer map, Mousillon is listed as a Vampire Count sub-faction, and yeah, that's going to be interesting. There's literally a vampire faction right in the middle of Bretonnia, which is pretty cool. Or not in the middle, but to the west-ish, sort of, I believe. So yeah, that's going to be quite interesting to see. So now we talk about society. Now, society is interesting in Bretonnia, where there are three major pillars supporting the Bretonnian feudal system: the nobility, the clergy, and the peasantry in order of authority. The peasantry grow the food, they do all the work, support civil infrastructure. The nobility hold all authoritative power and privilege. They are duty-bound to face all dangers threatening the kingdom, both local or foreign, and uphold all qualities of honor and chivalry, at least publicly. The entire system is then held together by the clerical class, whose duties are to maintain the kingdom's spiritual health, enforce the faith, and all moral authority within the kingdom. Primarily, they are used to keep the peasantry in check, suppressing uncontentment and rebellion. The clerical class are also the record keepers and administration of Bretonnia. Does that sound any familiar to you? The monks and all that of Christianity sound right? Advising the king and other nobles at all levels. All learning and writing is done through them or is under their influence. The hunting down of witches and mutants are their darkest and most important duty. The geography of Bretonnia is decidedly rural. All powerful local traditions allow little to no innovation in science and enlightened modern philosophy. Its people are somewhat backwards and highly provincial compared to the more technologically advanced nations of the old world, such as the dwarfs and the Empire. The Bretonnian military is well known to shun advanced weaponry such as handguns, cannons, and most war machines, seeing them as all dishonorable weapons that go against the ideals of chivalry and the will of their patron, the Lady of the Lake. Now, you heard me mention chivalry in the society bit. Now, Bretonnian nobility follow the codes of chivalry, which were introduced by the first king, Gilles le Breton, essentially a set of laws stating how the Bretonnian duchy should be run. A list of commandments come with the code, and they are to serve the Lady of the Lake, to defend the domains entrusted to him, to protect the weak and fight for the right, always to fight the enemies of virtue and order, never to give up the fight until the foe be defeated, never to break faith with a friend or ally, and always to display honor and courtesy. And separate to the commandments, the knights follow the rules of honor, which date back to the origins of knights in Bretonnia. They are as follow. A knight may only fight hand-to-hand with sword or lance. He may not use a missile weapon. A knight shall always accept a challenge towards personal combat. A knight shall not draw sword against his fellow Bretonnian knight except in trial by combat or within a tournament. A knight shall not allow himself to be captured alive, and a knight shall not flee from the enemy nor retreat without proper tactical cause. Now this kind of shows or gives us insight onto how knights will be in Total War Warhammer. A knight shall not allow himself to be captured alive, and a knight shall not flee from the enemy nor retreat without proper tactical cause. This essentially means that if they follow this rules of honor thing that the knights have, knights are going to be unbreakable unless you're told to retreat, I guess, yourself, and they won't surrender. So it's going to be interesting. Obviously the peasants are going to surrender or run away as soon as something looks at them the wrong way, but the knights are going to be so stubborn with their honor, basically, that maybe they won't run, and that's going to be quite interesting, but we'll get into that as we talk about the units later. So after talking about government and society, we now move on to religion. And Bretonnia is a mess of religions due to its main one, that being the worship of the Lady of the Lake, being prohibited to the classes below nobility, while the middle class can pray at shrines and temples. They are essentially taxed to do so. However, the peasantry are forbidden from open worship of the Lady under punishment of death, so instead they take to the gods of the old world, such as Ulrich, Myrmedia, Raya, Tal, Verena, Mor, and the largest, Shalia, due to her love of the common people, which pretty much relates to the peasantry of Bretonnia. Revered throughout Bretonnia, but almost unknown anywhere else, the Lady of the Lake is the Bretonnian patron goddess of purity, nobility, and courage in the face of danger. Grail chapels are built throughout Bretonnia, and it is a task of the Grail Knights to protect these shrines. Some spend their entire lives defending the Lady's sacred places, becoming Hermit Knights. The fame of Hermit Knights quickly spreads, usually bringing with it a following of commoners. This ragtag group of individuals can go on to form a brotherhood, and if they are recognized by the Grail Temple in Bastogne and receive a royal patent from the king, they can form an estate monastery or Grail Abbey. These monks are fanatic and can be called in times of war to serve as powerful shock infantry and morale boosters due to their dedication to the Lady. So we've gone through that. It is now time to look at the roster for Bretonnia. So, of course, like always, I have built a roster that you guys will see now that is relatable to one that would be in Total War Warhammer. So, of course, we have legendary lords. So, first we have King Luin Lancour. He is our first legendary lord, and he has been seen in-game. He is the current king of Bretonnia and the Duke, or not in-game, but in the videos that CA has put out. He's the current king of Bretonnia and the Duke of Couronne. Now, what Luin Lancour is bringing to the game, to the table, basically, is he's up there with coolest mount with Karl Franz. Karl Franz has Deathclaw, while Luin has his Hippogriff Bequis, or Bequis, French stuff, I don't know, Bequis. Hippogriffs are pretty cool because they are horses with the front of their front bodies being a hawk, eagle, whatever. Whereas, of course, it's going to be smaller than Deathclaw, of course, so with Deathclaw being a tiger in the rear and an eagle hawk thing in the front, a hippogriff is a horse and an eagle mix thing. It's weird, I don't know, but it's going to be interesting. Luin is an amazing fighter, and he has the nickname the Lionhearted, which he received during his years as a questing knight. He encountered and defeated the Green Knight and earned the blessings of the fair prophetess Carolinda during his journeys. So look at that. Now our second possibly legendary lord, or legendary lady as I should say, is Morgiana Le Fay. I'm just going to call her the Fey Enchantress because that is her title, and that is who she is. Now the Fey Enchantress is the earthly representative of the Lady of the Lake and the overall and undisputed leader of the cult of said god. Now, the Fey Enchantress is the supreme political and spiritual authority of Bretonnia. It is she who crowns a new king of Bretonnia, and she has the power to depose a ruling monarch. Assuredly an exceptional occurrence. It happened at least once. King Balum the Brave was deposed and exiled by the Grail Knights upon orders of the Fey Enchantress, who also chose his successor. She is a very powerful magic caster, and she has access to all 8 of the regular lores of magic, those being beasts, death, fire, heavens, life, light, metal, and shadow. That makes her one of the strongest casters in Warhammer, apart from lizardmen magic and some elven casters. Now, I'm not sure if she'll actually be a named character that you can use, but I would imagine that at least a Fey Enchantress would be usable, because why not? It's one of the more powerful and better characters for the Bretonnians to use in the tabletop. I wouldn't see why not. So then for our next legendary character, we have the Green Knight. Now, the Green Knight I highly doubt will be a legendary lord, but I could be surprised, but I highly doubt he will, as he is the eternal champion of the Lady of the Lake and the ghostly defender of Bretonnia. He's essentially a spirit. He goes around clearing forests and other lands of beastmen and greenskins himself, and he also materializes to test questing knights when they're on their search for the Grail in order to prove their worth to the lady. So, while a legendary character for Bretonnia, I can't see him being a general. I can't see him leading armies. So, yeah, that's that. So then for lords, these are going to be the not stereotypical, but the typical units leading your armies. Now, first for lords, we have the Bretonnian Lord, and they are powerful noblemen or knights whose deeds are recounted throughout the lands, warriors unparalleled in combat, and the stout follower of the codes of chivalry. Now, while being called a lord, they actually could be any of the 3 big titles of Bretonnia. They could be an earl, a baron, or even a duke. But just for simplicity's sake, they're called a lord. But in Total War Warhammer, your generals will more than likely have titles in front of their name, so you could have earl, whatever, baron, such, duke, whoever. You get my drift. So then for our second lord choice, we have the Prophetess of the Lady. These are the most favored devotees of the Lady, whom have served their divine mistress faithfully for much of their lives. They are potent spellcasters, and their magic can dramatically affect the outcome of any battle. Their magic is elemental in nature, controlling plants and the animals of land, air, and water, calling down raging storms, thick cloaking mists, and mighty bolts of lightning. Now, these are very strong spellcasters as well, as said just then. They have access to multiple lores, those being beasts, heavens, light, and life and undeath. So they have a wide range of spells that they could possibly choose from. Now, this isn't confirmed to all be in Total War Warhammer, of course. They might only be able to use heavens, who knows, but it is good that they have all these options, so it's going to be very interesting to see how CA pull these off in Total War Warhammer. So then we move on to the characters, and just like in or the heroes rather. And just like in the other factions, these are basically going to be your agents. And we have first the Paladin. Now, the Paladins are powerful warriors renowned throughout Bretonnia for their chivalry and feat of arms in combat against all evil, as respected and noble as a knight can become without the Grail blessing. Many of them are highly ranked nobles holding titles such as Earl or Baron, while others hold warrior titles such as Marshal or Warden. They are legendary heroic fighters as well as leaders for an army of noble knights. So our next character is the Damsel of the Lady. Lesser servants of the Lady, not as long in service as the Prophetess. They specialize in protective wardings, purifications, healing, and the dispelling of hostile magic, coming to the aid of armies and questing knights. Moving always from place to place at the lady's needs so as to root out evil and corruption, hunt down potentially gifted children, and guide heroes unto holy sites in need of protection. So, the damsels, as mentioned just a second ago, they gather up children that are known to be magically gifted, and they pretty much take them to the lady, and they become more damsels and such. No one knows what happened to magical men. If they're taken by a damsel, they're probably disposed of. Who knows? No one's ever seen a magical man after they've been taken by damsels and prophetess, so that's pretty interesting. But it even says in this little description here that they come to the aid of armies and stuff when needed, and the questing knights. So this just fits perfectly into the fact that they'd be an agent unit where they can help cast magic and just protect the army from other magic. And although not quite sure, in the Bretonnia versus Orcs battle we've seen for Azheg's Ard Armor quest, we see a magic caster by the name of Faye LaFay. Now, I tried to contact Joyberry about this, but she's very hard to get in contact to unless she really, follows you on Twitter and stuff. So I didn't get confirmation, so I don't quite know what she was. But the fact that she was called Faye LaFay really confused me, because the only LaFay I could find was the Faye Enchantress. I doubt that's what she was. I assumed that she was just a damsel of the lady, but who knows, I might be mistaken. But I couldn't find a character named Faye LaFay, so I highly doubt she's anyone special other than a damsel. So yeah, there's that. So now we move on to mounts for the Bretonnians. First, we have the Bretonnian Warhorse. Now, a Bretonnian Warhorse are believed to be the best in the old world because of their endurance and fiery temper. These are going to be your basic mount for basically everybody. All of the characters listed can be mounted. That's right, everyone, even damsels, prophetess, all those. So basically all your generals are always going to be mounted, essentially. Then next we have Pegasus, or Pegasi. I don't know if that's how it's supposed to say. But only the richest and influential knights can boast about having them. These are very rare creatures, very expensive. So basically your lords will probably be the only people that can actually quite ride them. And of course, Lewin and even the Faye Enchantress, possibly. And then finally we have Hippogriffs, a ferocious creature. A hippogriff has the head of an eagle and the body of a horse, only owned and trained by the greatest of lords and nobles. So, of course, Lewin can ride a hippogriff, or he can ride his special hippogriff, as we mentioned earlier, Bequi or Bequis or whatever his name is. And, yeah, your lords, of course, your actual lord, like Bretonnian lord, will, of course, be able to ride these as well. So, then we move on to melee infantry, and trust me, there is not a lot. So, we have Men-at-Arms. Now, Men-at-Arms are the basic frontline infantry that comprises most Bretonnian armies. Some are, of course, all cavalry. These men have been chosen from a very young age to be trained and equipped with basic weaponry and gear and fight on the behalf of their lord, wearing mostly chainmail while also having gambesons and leather. These reluctant and adequate soldiers are responsible for defending a noble master's castle or holding the line against the enemy with shield and spear, or halberd, whilst the knights upon their mighty warhorses attack from the flanks and bring victory. So there's possibly going to be two units. Now, in the battle against Azhag, again, we've seen a unit with halberds, so I assume that's men-at-arm halberd units, but they didn't have shields, so it's quite interesting. I'm not quite sure what they were, but again, we'll see as more coverage for Bretonnia comes out in the coming weeks and months up to release. Now, the other melee infantry is the Grail Pilgrims. Though not considered an official part of Bretonnian armies, these pilgrims are fanatic and pious followers who believe zealously within the holiness of their chosen Grail Knight. These guys follow Grail Knights. We'll talk about them in a second. Flocking in their dozens to join and bask in their master's reflected glory. Equipped with the discarded weapons and armor of the Grail Knight, these units provide the Bretonnian army with a much more reliable source of stalwart shock troop infantry. Very interesting. So we move on to ranged infantry, and there's only one unit. We have peasant bowmen. Now, commoners that are not fit to join the men-at-arms companies are often press-ganged at need into service as basic support units. Archers are a common and readily formed unit, as all peasants and commoners within Bretonnia are required to maintain a proficiency with the bow, their willingness being reinforced by the promised bounty of copper coin for any who survive the campaign, an exception from tithing and the right to loot the enemy fallen. So yeah, these guys are mounted with longbows. And in the tabletop, these are the only archers that can use flaming arrows because they bring, the little things to light their arrows with. I can't quite remember what it's called at the moment, but so I'm not quite sure what they're going to do in Total War. Are they going to give Bretonnia their uniqueness of being the only faction with fire arrows? I'm not quite sure. It would be a change from Total War not being able to use fire arrows as anyone. I'm quite interested to see what they'll do. And then we have artillery, and for artillery, the Bretonnians field the field trebuchet. And trebuchets are immense siege engines used to lob large projectiles at enemy formations from a safe distance. The machine itself can vary greatly in design, and the projectiles thrown can range in weight from a cannonball-sized rock up to as large as a peasant's hovel. Due to its bad reputation as a dishonorable weapon and the lack of any proper education amongst the common people, only a handful of craftsmen have the skills and knowledge to build such expensive and time-consuming devices. Thus, with only a finite number of engineers available for hire and no consistent quality or qualifications amongst them, trebuchets are usually scratch-built on site using whatever materials lay at hand, and are then stripped down again for scrap, with only the valuable iron-forged parts traveling from siege to siege, along with the hired engineer that made them. Now, we've seen these in the Aztec quest battle. You could see how nice the stones were that they threw, and they just crash right into enemy or into infantry and just send them flying. It's quite entertaining. So then, for the most important part of the Bretonnian army, we have cavalry. So first we have mounted yeomen, and these are the guys that everybody's seen in the Aztec battle, and everybody got pissed off because they're like, where are the knights? Oh, but it was an early battle. Don't worry, that's not representative of Bretonnia at all. Their cavalry is crazy, and you'll see as we go down through the list. So yeomen are experienced soldiers who provide the Bretonnian army with fast cavalry and scouts. These veterans have fought in and survived many battles with only the skills of their arms and their unwavering bravery. So due to surviving so many battles and not dying, as most peasants do, they get promoted to yeomen and are given a very crap horse. They're not given the war horses of the knights. They're given their own, less powerful horses. But these are going to be the early game cavalry for Bretonnia before they get their knights. And, of course, as I said, these are literally just peasants that survived enough battles. But they're actually experienced, so they do know how to fight. They are going to be useful. They're fast. And they're going to be a very useful unit in coordination with the other peasant units. Now we move on to the actual real meat, the real cavalry of the Bretonnians. We have the Knights Errant, and these are young nobles that are the lowest ranking member of most Bretonnian cavalry, as well as the nobility. In the prime of youth, these ill-experienced but highly enthusiastic warriors comprise a significant portion of many Bretonnian armies. Fighting on horseback, these knights often engage the best enemy regiments with their eagerness to earn the title of a Knight of the Realm. So these are young nobles who don't have the right to be a Knight of the Realm. And these are all basically young adults that don't have their own lands. So once they prove themselves as a Knight Errant, they move on to the Knights of the Realm. And the Knights of the Realm are a backbone of nearly all Bretonnian armies, and as such, they are the most common members of the ruling elite. They have distinguished themselves in errantry and have thus received a fief or a position of power within nobility. They are expected to honor and defend their lords and kingdom from the depredation of all those that seek to destroy it, fighting on horseback with lance in hand and their unwavering faith in the Lady of the Lake. So this is basically going to be your first unit that won't break, essentially. These are the real knights. These are the ones that are going to just charge in and flatten everything and just fight to the last man, essentially. But we move on to questing knights. Now, questing knights are nobles who are seeking the attention of the patron goddess, the Lady of the Lake, in hopes of acquiring her blessing as a means to obtain the status of a Grail Knight. Living a solitary existence, these men would strive to prove themselves to the lady, performing good deeds, slaying foul beasts, and aiding the armies of Bretonnia when in times of peril. And these are Knights of the Realm that have given up their lands, given up their titles to quest in an attempt to obtain the status of Grail Knight, as it said earlier, and get the blessing of the lady. These guys are going to be absolutely zealous beasts that they're just gonna be better. As I go through these units, they're literally just up and up and up, like upgrades to knights essentially, but they're all going to be different units, I would imagine, and they all have varying levels of skills and all that. So then we move on to the Grail Knights. Now these are the pinnacle of Bretonnian cavalry. They are chivalrous, they're very honorable, then they're super brave. Those questing knights who have drunk from the Holy Grail are blessed with the powers of the lady and have thus been proven worthy to become a Grail Knight. To obtain the position of a Grail Knight is the ultimate goal for all knights, and to become one is the very embodiment of a holy warrior. It is said that these knights are one of the greatest of mankind's warriors to ever walk the earth. Grail Knights are going to be so powerful, guys. These are going to be absolute monsters in Total War Warhammer. They charge anything, they are just going to absolutely kill it. There is no ands, ifs, or buts about it. And they are not even quite human. They're pretty much essentially superhuman because they've been imbued with the power of the lady. And they actually are given extended life as well. So most Grail Knights are actually quite old because they've spent their entire life as a questing knight trying to prove themselves. But once they finally do, and survive of course, they are just given a much longer life so that they can serve the lady even longer. And finally, just to top it off, we have the Pegasus Knights. So unlike traditional mounted warfare, those knights that can tame and ride the mighty Pegasus, and of course afford them, into battle are warriors without equal. Flying across the battlefield with wings of angelic appearance, the Pegasus Knights take to the sky and fight the flying monstrosities the enemy has unleashed upon them with lance and swords. So you can imagine a cavalry charge. Now imagine a cavalry charge in the air against like a dragon or something. They're literally just going to shove their lances right into like the chest of dragons and other flying creatures. It's going to be very interesting, and I would imagine, of course, they can swoop down and hit people as they fly past and such, and kick people, because of course it's just a flying horse essentially. So it's going to be very interesting to see how these guys work in Total War Warhammer. I'm so excited to see Bretonnia, guys. They are absolutely awesome. So that has been the roster essentially. So now we're going to go into more detail for the two legendary lords, of course, Lewin Leoncoeur and the Fey Enchantress. Now, Lewin is considered the greatest leader of the Bretonians since Gilles the Uniter, which is Gilles le Breton. Also, the Green Knight. Surprise! He's a mighty warrior king, and his subjects know well that he is the pinnacle of knightly perfection and honor. Highly skilled on the field of battle and a master of tactics and strategy, he has never known defeat. Commoners and nobles alike speak of Leoncoeur with the same reverence, liking him to the mighty companions of Gilles from ages past. Some even say that the blood of Gilles runs in his veins. As ferocious yet honorable in diplomacy as he is in war, King Lewin the Lion-Hearted is renowned far beyond the borders of Bretonnia itself and respected by all. So he is of course going to be the main legendary lord, and in videos we have seen him on the campaign map riding Bequests, I don't know. So it's going to be very interesting to see him. I know these are things that I just mentioned earlier, just saying again, but yeah, it's going to be quite interesting to see. And then of course we have more, I really don't like this name, Morgiana Le Fay. There we go. And as we mentioned earlier, these are basically the real leaders of Bretonnia. As long as they like what the king is doing, he can stay in power, but as soon as he does something that goes against the Lady of the Lake, the Fey Enchantress just instantly deposes of him and the Grail Knights exile him. So it's quite interesting. So these actually have more power over the king than the king really does. So it's going to be very interesting that that these guys are going to be, or these chicks, this chick, sorry, it is one person. Just speaking as a title instead of a person is kind of throwing me off, but it's just also going to be the main source of magic if she is a legendary lord. It's going to be very interesting having access to the 8 lords of magic with this faction. This is going to be the first faction that can actually do so on one wizard, that is. Of course, the Empire has access to a bunch of, or all of the lords in their different wizards, but we've only been confirmed a bright wizard on the roster, so I'm not quite sure how that'll play out, but it should be interesting. But yeah, guys, that's kind of brief. I have spent a long time talking about the other parts, so hopefully that made up for the kind of briefness on the characters. I can't quite talk to them as they talk about them as they haven't had any information given to me in terms of Total War. I can read the lore, but of course that's literally just reading stuff off a page instead of just reading from my notes that I can build from information from the actual game. So I hope you understand. I hope you learned at least. And I'd like to thank you for watching. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the next episode, which will probably be one of the elf factions or maybe beastmen or something that can relate to maybe the earlier 2 games or even the first game. But anyway, guys, this has been Overkill as always, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.